Welcome, one and all, my friends. Welcome to the flickering glow of the fireside. But it should be said that many say that the electric light bulb is responsible for banishing away many of our primitive fears. And they may be right with that. But I will say that there are certain inventions that have gone the other way, that have made things a little too clear for us and invited fresh horrors in. My first story tonight is about one such invention, and it concerns a friend of mine. Horrible beyond conception was the change that had come over my best friend, Crawford Tillinghast. I had not seen him since that day 2.5 months before, when he had told me toward what goal his physical and metaphysical researches were leading. When he had met my awed and almost frightened remonstrances with a burst of fanatical rage, driving me from his laboratory and his home. I had known that since then he had been mostly shut up in his attic laboratory, with that accursed electrical machine, eating little and excluding even the servants, but I had not thought so short an interval of 10 weeks could so alter or disfigure any human creature. It is not pleasant to see a stout man grown suddenly thin, and it is even worse when the baggy flesh becomes yellowed or greyed, the eyes sunken, circled, and uncannily glowing, the forehead veined and corrugated, the hands tremulous and twitching, and if there be combined with this a repellent unkemptness, a wild disorder of dress, a shock of dark hair grown white at the root, and a thick growth of white beard on a face that was once clean shaven, well, the cumulative effect is quite shocking. But such was the aspect of Crawford Tillinghast that night, when his half-coherent message brought me out of exile to his door. Such was the spectre that trembled before me as it admitted me, candle in shaking hand, glancing furtively over his shoulder, as if at unseen things in the shadowiness of the lone house set back from Benevolent Street. That Crawford Tillinghast should ever have studied science and philosophy was a mistake. Such things should be left to the frigid and impersonal investigator. For in the hands of the man of feeling and action, they can lead only towards two tragic consequences: despair, if he should fail in his task, and terrors unutterable and unimaginable should he succeed. Well, I had known that Tillinghast had been the prey of failure, solitary and melancholy, but now I perceived with a nauseating fear of my own that he had been the prey of success. I had warned him 10 weeks before, when he burst forth with his tale of what he felt himself on the verge of discovering. He had been flushed and excited then, speaking in a high and unnatural, though always pedantic voice.
What do we know of the world and the universe about us? Our means of receiving impressions are absurdly few, and our notions of surrounding objects infinitely narrow. We see things only as we are constructed to see them, and can gain no idea of their absolute nature. With 5 feeble senses, we pretend to comprehend the boundless complex cosmos, yet other beings, with a wider, stronger, or different range of senses, might not only see very differently the things we see, but might see and study whole worlds of matter, energy, and life which lie close at hand, yet can never be detected with the senses we have. I've always believed that such strange, inaccessible worlds exist at our very elbows, and now I believe I have found the way to break down the barriers. I'm not joking. Within 24 hours, that machine near the table will generate waves, acting upon unrecognized sense organs that exist in us as atrophied and rudimentary vestiges. Those waves will open up to us many vistas unknown to man, and several unknown to anything we consider organic life. We shall see that at which dogs howl in the dark, and that at which cats prick up their ears after midnight. We shall see things and other things which no breathing creature has yet seen. We shall overleap time, space, and dimensions, and without bodily motion peer into the bottom of creation.
I'm finding it hard to peer through and see you at the moment, Tillinghast, but when he had said these things to me, I remonstrated, for I knew him well enough to be frightened rather than amused. But he was a fanatic, and drove me from his house. Now he was no less a fanatic, but the desire to speak had clearly conquered his resentment, and he had written to me, imperatively, in a hand I could scarcely recognize. Now, once I entered the abode of the friend that was so recently metamorphosed into a shivering gargoyle, I felt myself infected by the terrors that seemed stalking in the shadows. The words and beliefs expressed some 8 weeks before were bodied forth in the darkness beyond the flickering circle of candlelight, and I sickened at the hollowed, altered voice of my host. I wished that the servants were there, and I didn't like it when he said that they had all left 3 days before. That was strange. Surely old Gregory would not desert his master without telling as tried and trusted a friend as I. Well, it was from him that I had received all of my information of Tillinghast after I had been repulsed in rage. But I soon subordinated all of my fears toward my growing curiosity and fascination. I mean, just what Tillinghast wished of me I could not guess, but that he had some stupendous secret or discovery to impart, of that I could not doubt. Before I had protested at his unnatural pryings into the unimaginable, but now that he had evidently succeeded, at least to some degree, I almost shared his spirit, terrible though the consequences of the victory appeared to be. Up through the shadowiness of the dark house I followed, the bobbing candle flame in the hand of that shaking parody on man. The electricity all appeared to be switched off, and when I asked my host, he said that it was for a definite reason.
It would be too much. I would not dare.
Well, I particularly noted his habit of muttering, for it was not like him to talk to himself. I entered the attic laboratory with the detestable electrical machine glowing with a sickly, sinister, violet luminosity. And I saw that it was plugged into its chemical battery, but it was receiving no current. I recalled at the experimental stage that it had sputtered and purred when in action, and I asked, "Is that electrical in any way?"
Don't touch it. It's delicate. No, that glow that you see is not electrical. Leastways, not in any sense you could understand.
Well, I seated myself now beside the machine so that it was to my right, and Tillinghast turned a switch that was beneath the crowning cluster of glass bulbs. The old sputtering began, and then it turned into a whine and terminated in a drone that was so soft as to suggest a return to silence. The luminosity also increased and then waned, and then took on a pale outre color or blend of colors that I could not place nor describe. But Tillinghast was watching me, and he noted my puzzled expression.
Do you know what that is? That is ultraviolet. You thought ultraviolet was invisible, and so it is. But you can see that and many other invisible things now. Listen to me. The waves from that thing are waking 1,000 sleeping senses in us. Senses which we inherit from aeons of evolution, from the state of detached electrons to the state of organic humanity. I have seen the truth, and I intend to show it to you. Do you wonder how it will seem? I will tell you. Your existing sense organs, ears first, I think, will pick up many of the impressions, for they are closely connected with the dormant organs. Then there will be others. You've heard of the pineal gland? I laugh at the shallow endocrinologist, fellow dupe and fellow parvenu of the Freudian. That gland is the great sense organ of organs. I have found out. It is like sight in the end, and transmits visual pictures to the brain. If you are normal, that is the way you ought to get most of it. I mean, get most of the evidence from beyond.
I looked about the immense attic apartment with the sloping southern wall bathed in rays that the everyday eye cannot see. The corners were all shrouded in shadow, and it lent a hazy unreality that obscured its nature and invited the imagination towards symbolism and phantasm. During the interval that Tillinghast was silent, I fancied that I was in some vast and incredible temple of long-dead gods, with some vague edifice with innumerable black stone columns stretching up from damp slabs to a cloudy height beyond the range of my vision. That picture was very vivid for a while, and then it gave way to another more horrible conception, that of utter absolute solitude in infinite sightless, soundless space. There was a void and nothing more, and I felt a childish fear that caused me to draw from my hip pocket the revolver that I have always carried since that time that I was held up in East Providence after dark. Well, then, from the farthermost regions of remoteness, the sound softly glided into existence. It was infinitely faint, subtly vibrant, and unmistakably musical. It had a surpassing wildness to it that meant its impact upon me was like a delicate torture upon my whole body. I felt sensations such as when one accidentally scratches against ground glass, and simultaneously there was a cold draught that, well, it was apparently sweeping towards me from the direction of the sound. The sound and the wind increased as I waited breathlessly, and I felt a sensation as if I was tied to rails of a train track, awaiting the approach of some gigantic locomotive. Well, I spoke to Tillinghast, and the impressions faded away at once. There was just the man, the glowing machine, and the dimly lit apartment. But Tillinghast was grinning repulsively at the revolver that I had almost unconsciously drawn, and from his expression I could see that he had surely seen and heard as much as I, if not a good deal more. I explained to him my experiences, and he bade me to remain as quiet and receptive as possible.
Don't move, for in these rays we are able to be seen, as well as to see. I told you the servants left, but I didn't tell you how. It was that thick-witted housekeeper. She turned on the lights downstairs after I warned her not to, and the wires picked up sympathetic vibrations. It must have been frightful. I could hear the screams up here in spite of all I was seeing and hearing from another direction. And later it was rather awful to find those empty heaps of clothes around the house. Mrs. Updike's clothes were close to the front hall switch. That's how I know she did it. Got them all. But so long as we don't move, we are fairly safe. Remember, we're dealing with a hideous world in which we are practically helpless. Keep still.
The combined shock of the revelation and the abruptness of the command caused a kind of paralysis in me. And in my terror, my mind opened to the impressions again from what Tillinghast called beyond. I was now in a vortex of sound and motion, with confused pictures before my eyes. I could see the blurred outlines of the room, but from some point in space, ahead and to the right of me, it seemed like a seething column of shapes or clouds was pouring through the seemingly solid roof. I glimpsed once again the temple-like effect, and this time the pillars were stretching upwards to a vast aerial ocean of light, and it was sending down one blinding beam along the path of the column. And then the scene became entirely kaleidoscopic, and in amongst the jumble of sights and sounds and vague sense impressions, I felt like I was about to dissolve, or in some way lose my solid form. One definite flash that I saw, I was stood before a patch of strange night sky, with rotating orbs shining before me. And these spheres receded. They seemed to settle into some definite constellation or galaxy, a settled shape, the shape of the face of Crawford Tillinghast. Another time, the huge, animate thing seemed to brush against me, or past me, or through me, as if walking or drifting through my solid body. I saw Tillinghast look in their direction as if he could catch them visually. I recalled what he said of the pineal gland, and I wondered what he could see with his preternatural eye. But I found myself suddenly possessed of a kind of augmented sight over and above the luminous and shadowy chaos. There arose before me a picture that had the elements of consistency and permanence. It was familiar in a way, for the unusual aspects were superimposed upon the usual or terrestrial scene, much as a cinema view might be projected or thrown upon the painted curtain of a theatre. I saw the attic laboratory. I saw the electrical machine and the unsightly form of Crawford Tillinghast, but for all the space that was unoccupied by familiar material objects, not one particle of it was vacant. Indescribable shapes, both alive and otherwise, were mixed in a disgusting disarray. And close to every known thing, there were whole worlds of alien, unknown entities, and the known things entered into the unknown things, and vice versa. Foremost amongst the living objects that I saw were great inky, jellyish monstrosities, which flabbily quivered in harmony with the vibrations from the machine. They were present in loathsome profusion, and I saw to my horror that they were semi-fluid, and they seemed to be able to pass through one another and through what we would know as solid objects. They were never still, but they floated about with some malignant purpose, and sometimes they devoured one another, the attacker throwing itself upon its victim and then instantaneously obliterating it from existence. I thought I knew what had obliterated the unfortunate servants, and I could not exclude them from my mind as I strove to observe other properties in the newly visible world that usually remains unseen around us. But Tillinghast was watching me, and he was speaking.
You see them. You see them. You see the things that float and flop around you and through you every moment of your life. You see the creatures that form what men call pure air and blue sky. Have I not succeeded in breaking down the barrier? Have I not shown you worlds that no other living men have seen?
I heard him scream close to me through the horrible chaos. His wild face was thrust offensively close to mine. His eyes were pits of flame. He glared at me with what I could tell now was overwhelming hatred. And the machine whirred on detestably.
You think those floundering things wiped out the servants? Fool! They are harmless. But the servants are gone, aren't they? You tried to stop me. You discouraged me when I needed every drop of encouragement I could get. You were afraid of the cosmic truth, you damn coward. But now I've got you. What swept up the servants? What made them scream so loud? Don't know, eh? Well, you'll know soon enough. Look at me. Listen to what I say. Do you suppose there are really any such things as time and magnitude? Do you fancy there are such things as form or matter? I tell you, I have struck depths that your little brain can't picture. I've seen beyond the bounds of infinity and drawn down demons from the stars. I've harnessed the shadows that stride from world to sow death and madness. Space belongs to me, do you hear? Things are hunting me now, the things that devour and dissolve, but I know how to elude them. It is you they will get, as they got the servants. Stirring, dear sir? I told you it was dangerous to move. I have saved you so far by telling you to keep still, saved you to see more sights and to listen to me. But if you had moved, they would have been at you long ago. Don't worry. They won't hurt you. They didn't hurt the servants. It was seeing that made the poor devil scream so. Oh, my pets are not pretty, for they come out of places where aesthetic standards are very different. Disintegration is quite painless, I assure you. But I want you to see them. I almost saw them, but I knew how to stop. You're not curious? I always knew you were no scientist. Trembling, eh? Trembling with anxiety to see the ultimate things I have discovered. Why don't you move then? Tired? Well, don't worry, my friend, for they are coming. Look! Look! Curse you, look! It's just over your left shoulder!
What remains to be told is very brief and may be familiar to you from the newspaper accounts of the time. The police heard the gunshot and entered into the old Tillinghast place, and they found us both there, Tillinghast dead and me unconscious. They arrested me because they found the revolver in my hand, but they released me within 3 hours when they realized that it was apoplexy which had finished Tillinghast, and when they realized that my shot had been directed toward the noxious machine that now lay shattered in 1,000 fragments upon the laboratory floor. Now, I did not tell much of what I had seen for fear that the coroner would be skeptical. Well, from the evasive outline that I did give, the doctor concluded that clearly I must have been hypnotized by the vindictive and homicidal madman. Well, I wish I could believe that, Doctor. It would help my shaky nerves if I could dismiss certain things that I have to think now about the pure air and the blue sky above. I never feel alone or comfortable, and the hideous sense of pursuit sometimes comes chillingly upon me when I am weary. What prevents me from believing that, Doctor, is the simple fact that the police never found the bodies of the servants that they say Crawford Tillinghast murdered. Well, my friends, I am very glad to be joined tonight by my good friend John. And though I am rather terrified after that tale that he might now feed me into some arcane mechanism just to glimpse secrets that mankind was never meant to know,
Oh, not tonight, I promise.
that's not entirely reassuring.
Well, thank you for the invitation to join you tonight. Well, it is a pleasure to be here. That tale of Tillinghast's terrifying experiments actually reminded me of something that happened to me in my student days. I once constructed my own electrical machine, in fact, but its uses were mainly to peer into the world of dream.
Ah, how wonderful. Well, I have an exposition of sleep come upon me. To sleep, perchance to dream, then.
For in that sleep, what dreams may come. I've frequently wondered if the majority of mankind ever paused to reflect upon the occasional titanic significance of dreams, and of the obscure world to which they belong. Whilst the greater number of nocturnal visions are perhaps no more than faint and fantastic reflections of our own waking experiences, Freud to the contrary with his puerile symbolism, there are still a certain remainder whose unmundane and ethereal character permits of no ordinary interpretation, and whose vaguely exciting and disquieting effect suggests possible minute glimpses into a sphere of mental existence no less important than physical life, yet separated from that life by an all but impossible barrier. From my experience, I cannot doubt but that man, when lost to terrestrial consciousness, is indeed sojourning in another and incorporeal life, of far different nature from the life we know, and of which only the slightest and most indistinct memories linger after waking. From those blurred and fragmentary memories we may infer much, yet prove little. We may guess that in dreams life, matter, and vitality, as the earth knows such things, are not necessarily constant, and that time and space do not exist as our waking selves comprehend them. Sometimes I believe that this is less material life than is our truer life, and that our vain presence on the terraqueous globe is itself the secondary, or merely virtual phenomenon. It was from a youthful reverie, filled with speculations of this sort, that I arose one afternoon in the winter of 1900 to 1901, when to the state psychopathic institution in which I served as an intern was brought the man whose case has ever since haunted me unceasingly. His name, as given on the records, was Joe Slater, or Slader, and his appearance was that of the typical denizen of the Catskill Mountain region, one of those strange, repellent scions of a primitive colonial peasant stock, whose isolation for nearly 3 centuries in the hilly fastness of a little-travelled countryside had caused them to sink into a kind of barbaric degeneracy, rather than advance with their more fortunately placed brethren of the thickly settled districts. Among these odd folk, who correspond exactly to the decadent element of white trash in the South, law and morals are non-existent. Joe Slater, who came to this institution in the vigilant custody of 4 state policemen, and who was described as a highly dangerous character, certainly presented no evidence of his perilous disposition when I first beheld him. Though well above the middle stature, and of somewhat brawny frame, he had an air of harmless stupidity. His age was unknown, since amongst his kind neither family records nor permanent family ties exist. But from the baldness of his head in front, and from the decayed condition of his teeth, the head surgeon wrote him down as a man of about 40. From the medical and court documents, we learned all that we gathered of his case. This man, a vagabond, a hunter and trapper, had always been strange in the eyes of his primitive associates. He had habitually slept at night beyond the ordinary time, and upon waking would often talk of unknown things in a manner so bizarre as to inspire fear, even in the hearts of an unimaginative populace. Not that from his form of language was at all unusual, for he never spoke, save in the debased patois of his environment, but the tone and tenor of his utterances were of such mysterious wildness that none might listen without apprehension. He himself was generally as terrified and baffled as his auditors, and within an hour after awakening would forget all that he had said, or at least all that had caused him to say what he did, relapsing into another bovine, half-amiable normality like that of the other hill-dwellers. As Slater grew older, his appearance, his matutinal aberrations, had gradually increased in frequency and violence, till about a month before his arrival at the institution had occurred the shocking tragedy which caused his arrest by the authorities.
One day, near noon, I reckon I had a sleep. I've been drinking since 5 the day before. Whiskey can do things to a man. I don't think I should have done this. I was roused by something I saw maybe in a dream. They said I was screaming fit to burst. They had brought me some of my neighbors running to my cabin where me and my family live. I rushed out in the snow, flinging my arms aloft, and I leapt up and I jumped into the air, and all the while I was shouting my out I had to reach some kind of big cabin with brightness in the roof and walls and the floor and they had queer music and it was far away. Two fellas tackled me and I don't really remember much. But I needed to find and kill me a certain thing that shines and shakes and laughs. And I struck out then and then I struck out some more and ah I hollered out my need to jump up high in the air and burn my way through anything that stopped me. My family and the neighbor folks, well, they all fled. And when they came back, I was gone. I reckon I left a bunch of pulped up flesh that had once been a living man only an hour before. None of them dared follow me. Probably wanted me to die out there in the cold, but a few days later, they all heard me screaming and crying out from a distant ravine, and they must have known I managed to survive. And someone they had to come get me. I made up a sheriff's posse, and on the first day I was found unconscious in the hollow of a tree. And they took me to the nearest jail. Uh, Folks from Albany, they examined me, doctors and the like, and I told them I'd gone to sleep after some whiskey. And when I woke, I found myself standing bloody handed in the snow in front of my cabin. The mangled corpse of my neighbor, Peter Slater, at my feet. I didn't know what I'd done, but I knew what people would have thought I did. So I ran into the woods. That's all I remember, except some kind of light, strange light in the heavens, and maybe that was still while I was sleeping.
Beyond these things, he seemed to know nothing, nor could the expert questioning of his interrogators bring out a single additional fact. But that night, Slater slept quietly, and the next morning he wakened with no singular feature save an alteration of expression. Dr. Bernard, who had been watching the patient, thought he noticed in his eyes a certain gleam of a peculiar quality, and in the flaccid lips an all but imperceptible tightening, as if of intelligent determination. But when questioned, Slater relapsed into the habitual vacancy of the mountaineer and only reiterated what he had said on the preceding day. On the third morning occurred the first of the man's mental attacks. After some show of uneasiness in sleep, he burst forth into a frenzy so powerful that the combined efforts of 4 men were needed to bind him in a straitjacket. The alienists listened with keen attention to his words, since their curiosity had been aroused to a high pitch by the suggestive, yet mostly conflicting and incoherent stories of his family and neighbours. Slater raved for upwards of 15 minutes, bambling in his backwoods dialect of great edifices of life, motions of space, strange music, and shadowy mountains and valleys. But most of all did he dwell upon some mysterious blazing entity that shook and laughed and mocked at him. This vast, vague personality seemed to have done him a terrible wrong, and to kill it in triumphant revenge was his paramount desire. In order to reach it, he said, he would soar through abysses of emptiness, burning every obstacle that stood in his way. Thus ran his discourse, until, with the greatest suddenness, he ceased. The fire of madness died from his eyes, and in dull wonder he looked at his questioners and asked why he was bound. Dr. Bernard unbuckled the leathern harness and did not restore it till night, when he succeeded in persuading Slater to don it of his own volition for his own good. The man had now admitted that he had sometimes talked queerly, though he knew not why. Within a week, 2 more attacks appeared, but from them the doctors learned little. On the source of Slater's visions they speculated at length, for since he could neither read nor write, and apparently never heard a legend or fairy tale, his gorgeous imagery was quite inexplicable. That it could not come from any known myth or romance was made especially clear by the fact that the unfortunate lunatic expressed himself only in his own simple manner. He raved of things he did not understand and could not interpret, things which he claimed to have experienced, but which he could not have learned through any normal or connected narration. The alienists soon agreed that abnormal dreams were the foundation of the trouble, dreams whose vividness could for a time completely dominate the waking mind of this basically inferior man. With due formality, Slater was tried for murder, acquitted on the grounds of insanity, and committed to the institution wherein I held so humble a post. I have said that I am a constant speculator concerning dream life, and from this you may judge of the eagerness with which I applied myself to the study of the new patient as soon as I had fully ascertained the facts of his case. He seemed to sense a certain friendliness in me, born no doubt of the interest I could not conceal, and the gentle manner in which I questioned him. Not that he ever recognized me during his attacks, when I hung breathlessly upon his chaotic but cosmic word pictures, but he knew me in his quiet hours, when he would sit by his barred window weaving baskets of straw and willow, and perhaps pining for the mountain freedom he could never enjoy again. His family never called to see him. Probably it had found another temporary head after the manner of the decadent mountain folk. By degrees I commenced to feel an overwhelming wonder at the mad and fantastic conceptions of Joe Slater. The man himself was pitiably inferior in mentality and language alike, but his glowing, titanic visions, though described in a barbarous and disjointed jargon, were assuredly things only a superior or even exceptional brain could conceive. How, I often asked myself, could the stolid imagination of a Catskill degenerate conjure up sights whose very possession argued a lurking spark of genius? How can any backwoods dullard have gained so much as an idea of those glittering realms of supernal radiance and space about which Slater ranted in his furious delirium? More and more I inclined to the belief that in the pitiful personality who cringed before me lay the disordered nucleus of something beyond my comprehension, something infinitely beyond the comprehension of my more experienced but less imaginative medical and scientific colleagues. Yet I could extract nothing definite from the man. The sum of all my investigation was that in a kind of semi-incorporeal dream life, Slater wandered or floated through resplendent and prodigious valleys, meadows, gardens, cities, and palaces of light, in a region unbounded and unknown to man. That there he was no peasant or degenerate, but a creature of importance and vivid life, moving proudly and dominantly, checked only by a certain deadly enemy, who seemed to be a being of visible yet ethereal structure, and who did not appear to be of human shape, since Slater never referred to it as a man, or aught save a thing. This thing had done Slater some hideous but unnamed wrong, which the maniac, if maniac he were, yearned to avenge. From the manner in which Slater alluded to their dealings, I judged that he and the luminous thing had met on equal terms, that in his dream existence the man himself was a luminous thing of the same race as his enemy. This impression was sustained by his frequent references to flying through space and burning all that impeded his progress. Yet these conceptions were formulated in rustic words wholly inadequate to convey them, a circumstance which drove me to the conclusion that if a true dream world indeed existed, oral language was not its medium for the transmission of thought. Could it be that the dream soul inhabiting this inferior body was desperately struggling to speak things which the simple and halting tongue of dullness could not utter? Could it be that I was face to face with intellectual emanations which could explain the mystery if I could but learn to discover and read them? I did not tell the older physicians of these things, for middle age is sceptical, cynical, and disinclined to accept new ideas. Besides, the head of the institution had but lately warned me in his paternal way that I was overworking, that my mind needed rest. It had long been my belief that human thought consists basically of atomic and molecular motion, convertible into ether waves of radiant energy like heat, light, and electricity. This belief had led earlier me to contemplate the possibility of telepathy or mental communication by means of a suitable apparatus. And I had in my college days prepared a set of transmitting and receiving instruments somewhat similar to the cumbrous devices employed in the wireless telegraphy at that crude pre-radio period. These I had tested with a fellow student, but achieved no result, had soon packed them away with other scientific odds and ends for possible future use. Now, in my intense desire to probe into the dream life of Joe Slater, I sought these instruments again, and spent several days in repairing them for action. When they were complete once more, I missed no opportunity for their trial. At each outburst of Slater's violence, I would fit the transmitter to his forehead and the receiver to my own, constantly making delicate adjustments for various hypothetical wavelengths of intellectual energy. I had but little notion of how the thought impressions would, if successfully conveyed, arouse an intelligent response in my brain, but I felt certain that I could detect and interpret them. Accordingly, I continued my experiments, though informing no one of their nature. It was on the 21st of February, 1901, that the thing finally occurred. As I look back across the years, I realize how unreal it seems, and sometimes half wonder if old Dr. Fenton was right when he charged it all to my excited imagination. I recall that he listened with great kindness and patience when I told him, but afterwards he gave me a nerve powder and arranged for the half-year's vacation on which I departed the next week. That fateful night, I was wildly agitated and perturbed, for despite the excellent care he had received, Joe Slater was unmistakably dying. Perhaps it was his mountain freedom that he missed, or perhaps the turmoil in his brain had grown too acute for his rather sluggish physique. But at all events, the flame of vitality flickered low in the decadent body. He was drowsy near the end, and as darkness fell, he dropped off into a troubled sleep. I did not, strap on the straitjacket, as was customary when he slept, since I saw that he was too feeble to be dangerous, even if he woke in mental disorder once more before passing away. But I did place upon his head and mine the two ends of my cosmic radio, hoping against hope for a first and last message from the dream world in the brief time remaining. In the cell with us was one nurse, a mediocre fellow who did not understand the purpose of the apparatus, or think to inquire into my course. As the hours wore on, I saw his head droop awkwardly in sleep, but I did not disturb him. I myself, lulled by the rhythmic breathing of the dying man, must have nodded a little later. Sound of weird, lyric melody was what aroused me. Chords, vibrations, and harmonic ecstasies echoed passionately on every hand, while on my ravaged sight burst the stupendous spectacle of ultimate beauty. Walls, columns, and architraves of living fire blazed effulgently around the spot where I seemed to float in air, extending upwards to an infinitely high-vaulted dome of indescribable splendor. Blending with this display of palatial magnificence, or rather supplanting it at times with kaleidoscopic rotation, were glimpses of wild plains and graceful valleys, high mountains and inviting grottos, covered with every lovely attribute of scenery which my delighted eye could conceive of, yet formed wholly of some glowing, ethereal, plastic entity, which in consistency partook as of much of spirit as of matter. As I gazed, I perceived that my own brain held the keys to these enchanting metamorphoses. For each vista which appeared to me was the one which my changing mind most wished to behold. Amidst this Elysian realm, I dwelt not as a stranger, for each sight and sound were familiar to me, just as it had been for uncounted eons of eternity before, and would be for like eternities to come. Then the resplendent aura of my brother of light drew near, and held colloquy with me, soul to soul, with silent and perfect interchange of thought. The hour was one of approaching triumph, for was not my fellow being escaping at last from a degrading periodic bondage, escaping forever and preparing to follow the accursed oppressor even into the utmost fields of ether, that upon it might be wrought a flaming cosmic vengeance which would shake the spheres. We floated thus for a little time, when I perceived a slight blurring and fading of the objects around us, as though some force were recalling me to earth, where I least wished to go. The form near me seemed to feel a change also, for it gradually brought its discourse towards a conclusion, and itself prepared to quit the scene, fading from my sight at a rate somewhat less rapid than those of the other objects. A few more thoughts were exchanged, and I knew that the luminous one and I were being recalled to bondage. Before my brother of light, it would be for the last time. The sorry planet shell being well nigh spent, in less than an hour my fellow would be free to pursue his oppressor along the Milky Way, and pass the hither stars to the very confines of infinity. A well-defined shock separates my final impression of the fading scene of light from my sudden and somewhat shamefaced awakening and straightening up in the chair, as I saw the dying figure on the couch move hesitantly. Joe Slater was indeed awaking, though possibly for the last time. As I looked more closely, I saw that in the sallow cheeks shone spots of colour which I had never before seen. The lips, too, seemed unusual, being tightly compressed, as if by the force of a stronger character than had been Slater's. The whole face finally began to grow tense, and the head turned restlessly with closed eyes. I did not arouse the sleeping nurse, but readjusted, slightly disarranged the headbands of my telepathic radio, intent on catching any parting message the dreamer might have to deliver. All at once, the head turned sharply in my direction. The eyes fell open, causing me to stare in blank amazement at what I beheld. The man who had been Joe Slater, the Catskill decadent, was now gazing at me with a pair of luminous, expanded eyes that seemed subtly to have deepened. Neither mania nor degeneracy was visible in that gaze, and I felt beyond a doubt that I was viewing a face behind which lay an active mind of the highest order.
Joe Slater is dead. He is better dead, for he was unfit to bear the active intellect of a cosmic entity. His gross body could not undergo the needed adjustments between ethereal life and planet life. He was too much of an animal, too little a man. Yet it is through his deficiency that you have come to discover me, for the cosmic and planetary souls rightly should never meet. He has been my torment and diurnal prison for 42 of your terrestrial years. I am an entity that, like you yourself become, in the freedom of dreamless sleep. I am your brother of light, and I have floated with you in effluent valleys. It is not permitted for your waking earth self to understand your real self, but we are all roamers of vast places, travelers of many ages. Next year I may be dwelling in the dark Egypt which you call ancient, or in the cruel empire of Tsan Shan, which has come 3,000 years hence. You and I have drifted in worlds together that reel about the red Arcturus, and we have dwelt in the bodies of insect philosophers that crawl proudly over the fourth moon of Jupiter. How little does the earth self know of the life beyond and its extent. How little indeed it ought to know for its own tranquility. Of the oppressor I cannot speak. You on earth have unwittingly felt its distant presence. You who knew without knowing, idly gave its blinking beacon the name Algol, the demon star. It is to meet and conquer the oppressor that I have valiantly striven for eons, held back by bodily encumbrances. Tonight, I go as a nemesis, bearing just and blazingly cataclysmic vengeance. Watch me in the sky, close by the demon star. I cannot speak longer, for the body of Joe Slater grows cold and rigid, and the coarse brains are ceasing to vibrate as I wish. You have been my friend in the cosmos. You have been my only friend on this planet, the only soul to sense and seek for me within this repellent form which lies on this couch. We shall meet again, perhaps in the shining mists of Orion's sword, perhaps on a bleak plateau in prehistoric Asia, perhaps unremembered dreams tonight, perhaps in some other form, an eon hence, when the solar system shall have at last been swept away.
At this point, the eyes of the dreamer, or can I say dead man, commenced to glaze fishily. In a half stupor, I crossed over to the couch and felt of his wrists, but found it cold, stiff, and pulseless. The sallow cheeks paled again, and the thick lips fell open, disclosing the repulsive, rotten fangs of the degenerate Joe Slater. I shivered, pulled a blanket over the hideous face, and awakened the nurse. I left the cell and went silently to my room. I had an insistent and unaccountable craving for a sleep whose dreams I should not remember. And the climax? What plain tale of science can boast such a rhetorical effect? Well, I have merely set down certain things appearing to me as facts, allowing you to construe them as you will. As I've already admitted, my superior, old Dr. Fenton, denies the reality of everything I have related. He vows that I was broken down with nervous strain and badly needed the long vacation on full pay which he so generously gave me. He assures me on his professional honor that Joe Slater was but a low-grade paranoic, whose fantastic notions must have come from the crude hereditary folk tales which circulate even in the most decadent of communities. All this he tells me, I cannot forget what I saw in the sky the night after Slater died. Now, lest you think me a biased witness, another's pen must add this final testimony, which perhaps may supply the climax you expect. I will quote the following account of the star Nova Persei, verbatim from the pages of that eminent astronomical authority, Professor Garrett T. Service. On February 22nd, 1901, a marvelous new star was discovered by Dr. Anderson of Edinburgh, not very far from Algol. No star had been visible at that point before. Within 24 hours, the stranger had become so bright that it outshone Capella. In a week or two, it had visibly faded, and in the course of the next few months, it was hardly discernible with the naked eye.
Well, thank you so very much for that second tale of weird science from Mr. Lovecraft. I think the role of eminent scientist or doctor quite becomes you.
Well, funny that you should say that, because I'm going to be coming back to Edwyrdian Tales again in the guise of a man of science, but a man of folklore too. Someone who truly understands the borderland between the natural and the supernatural. Someone who knows what lurks in the dark corners of the earth, silently haunting and hunting through the eons.
Ah, and we can't wait to have you back for that Edwyrdian classic in January. I should explain, ladies and gentlemen, we have something rather special this season. In January, we will not just be every fortnight, we will be blasting through every single week for a four-part representation of a classic story from literature of the Gothic. And very much looking forward to having you back as that champion of science and folklore.
Dr. Abraham Van Helsing at your service. And I look forward to hunting the scourge of all mankind, Count Dracula, with you.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Well, until then, my friends, we will be back in 3 weeks, in fact. We have a brief hiatus over Halloween, fittingly, because I will be up at Whitby Abbey hunting for the Count. And we will be back upon the 5th of November with a very different classic, The Spider by Hans Heinz Ewers. So until then.
Thank you for the invitation tonight. Perhaps be careful with throwing around invitations with vampires lurking in the shadows.
Very good point. Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me, John. It was wonderful to have you back and look forward to January with you. Well, good night, my friends, one and all, and God bless.